Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron, and welcome to another video game spoiler talk. Now, this is something that's still rather new on this channel. We did one earlier this year for God of War, then we did one for Spider-Man, but we can't end the year without talking about Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, I'm just gonna go ahead and warn everyone, I'm not reading off of a script, these are just my thoughts about the game coming right off the top of my head, so there isn't going to be any real kind of order to this. It's just really the stuff that I want to talk about and just my open, honest feelings about the game, just all kind of spewing out here. And if you watched our review of this, you know that I absolutely loved the middle part of this game. I did have some problems with the beginning of the game and with the pacing of it, and then with the massive epilogue, I kind of felt like this game just sort of kept on going, and I'm hoping that today with this spoiler talk, I'll be able to delve a little bit deeper into the stuff that I really did love, but also talk a little bit more about my specifics when it comes to the problems that I did have with that opening and with the ending of the game. Now, I will just go ahead and start by saying something about this game that might be a bit controversial. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are going to disagree with me on this, but I just have to go ahead and get it out of the way. I don't think Dutch had a plan. Yeah, let's go ahead and get that out of the way right now. I absolutely love the character of Dutch. I actually raved about his character in our review multiple times because I found him to be just such a fascinating character in this game. Just watching that slow decline as he was clearly spiraling into madness, but he was so charismatic and so confident in the beginning that you're like, okay, I think maybe he actually knows what he's talking about. I mean, hell, when I was going back and reviewing some of the early chapters of this game, when I had to get the video clips for our review, I kept looking back at him and what he was like at the start of this game. And I was like, oh, I would totally follow this guy. This guy absolutely has a plan. But I love that he just keeps falling so far down that towards the end, like the last time that he tells Arthur that he has a plan, I love that Arthur just says, I don't even know what you're saying anymore, Dutch, and I haven't known for a long time. I freaking love that moment because it was what all of us had been screaming at our screens this entire time. We had all been screaming at Arthur, listen man, he doesn't know what he's doing. So I was happy to hear him finally say that. But I kind of have to address his decline into madness because there's a theory going around the internet, and I hope it isn't true because I think this game did a wonderful job of showing his reasons for being desperate and how that desperation was slowly just kind of driving him to this point where he became a complete raving madman. And I love watching that decline happen to him. And I think that they were able to contrast his decline with the villain of every single chapter, which I will go ahead and say, it felt like the story was a little bit repetitive to me. Like every single chapter in here was, you move into a new town, you learn about the town, find the big villain in the town, try to rob that villain, it goes very poorly, your group ends up becoming worse off because of that, and then you have to take revenge on that big villain and then move on to the next town. And I do kind of count that as a little bit of a negative. Like, as soon as I realized that's the pattern of every single chapter of this, it did kind of like spoil where this story was going for me. However, the reason why it's not that much of a negative, in fact, in a weird way, it kind of comes back around to being a positive for me, is that they use this as a framing device because every single villain you went up against was worse than the last villain, and in order to beat them, Dutch ended up becoming worse than that villain. So it took this thing that could have been just really repetitive, and they turned it into basically just a downward staircase where every single villain was another step for Dutch as he just descended into madness. So I think that the slow downward decline of Dutch is great in here, and there's some wonderful foreshadowing as well. Like, for example, again, I completely missed this. I noticed it when I was going back and getting the footage for the review, but as Arthur and Charles are riding to the first new camp that you have to set up, it's the first time that things really start to go wrong for you, and you have to find a new location. As you're traveling out there, Arthur even says, listen, it's not like we're gonna end up in a cave somewhere. I mean, then there'd be no hope. Then we'd be nothing worse than just a bunch of low-life criminals. And spoiler alert, guess where you end up at the end of this game? You're living in a cave and you're just a bunch of low-life criminals at that point. There's also another wonderful piece of foreshadowing in here when it's the first time that you have to leave town and you're at the bar and Dutch and Arthur salute each other and Dutch says, "To your health." Yeah, I'll get into that a little bit later, but I wanted to make sure that I brought that up now while I still remembered it. But as I said, there's this weird theory going around the internet that Dutch, he had been going kind of steadily downhill. Like, things have been getting worse and worse for Dutch, but there came that mission where you had to rob the bank. When Dutch just got really desperate and you ended up stealing a trolley, and after you stole the trolley, it crashes, and Dutch is saying that he's got a headache. He hit his head really hard when it crashed, and after that moment, Dutch ends up just going completely off the deep end. Dutch just isn't even making sense anymore after that point, and there's a lot of people online who think that maybe the reason why he went off the deep end is because he now has brain damage. I really hope that is not the case, because they were doing such a wonderful job just slowly tearing this man apart. And if it eventually gets revealed in like an interview with the developers, oh no, yeah, he has brain damage, that's exactly why he went off the deep end, not because he was desperate, but because of a head injury, man, that feels so cheap to me. I do not want to subscribe to that theory. I like to believe that it actually was just a steady progression based on the situation that he finds himself in. In fact, I'll go ahead and say that in this one, we kind of see the decline of Dutch, and in Red Dead Redemption 1, we saw the death of Dutch. And again, you want to talk about some great foreshadowing in here? In Red Dead Redemption, Dutch dies when he's at the edge of a cliff, and he says, "I've got a plan. It's a good one." And he just jumps off the cliff to his death. In this game, there is a moment in which Dutch and Arthur are up against a cliff, and there's the river underneath them, and he says, "I've got a plan. It's a good one." And then they end up jumping off the cliff, and they survive because they land in the water. So yeah, I found that to be just great foreshadowing, or a callback. It's kind of weird when it's referencing the first game, but the first game takes place after the second game. So I don't know which of those two it counts as. But yeah, I thought that that was a great reference to the first game, and it gives that moment from the first game so many more dimensions. And also, I should go ahead and, for anybody who didn't watch the review, just come in here and remind everyone, I actually have not played the first game. I have watched a complete playthrough of it by the guys over at Rage Select, so I do know what happens to each of these characters, but I can come in here and say that even without having played the first game and just having like secondhand knowledge of the stuff that goes on in that game, yeah, there are still huge emotional moments in this game when I understood how they related back to the first game, especially when it all came to the end of the game, when it came to the epilogue, which now kind of seems like a good a time as any to actually discuss the epilogue of this game. If you watched our review, then you know that's kind of the whole reason why I did not give this game a higher score. I had problems with the start of this game, but when this game picked up, when the story was really just banging on all cylinders, when everything was just open to me and I could explore and find all these amazing secrets and side quests, and I really knew all these characters, yeah, this game was a perfect 10 out of 10 for me. Then the epilogue came in, and it just kept going and going and going, and it wasn't even all that interesting. There's so many bits in there that even as I was playing it, I could tell this is not important to the main storyline, and that just dragged everything down for me, and it's the reason why this game got as low of a score as it did for me. However, I will say, there are good things in the epilogue. I said that the epilogue ended up taking me roughly about 7 hours, which in all fairness, I took my time in there and I did experiment around. As soon as I realized that you could still do side quests and you could still hunt down secrets as John Marsden there at the end of the game, yeah, I tested that a little bit. I didn't carry any of them fully out to completion, but I did experiment with them enough to be able to say, oh my goodness, look at that. This is how much stuff you can still do in this game, even in the epilogue. but the main story itself, if you just do the main missions, it's still a solid 4 hours. And I stand by what I said in that review. You could cut this down to an hour and it would be a great epilogue, but there's still just so much padding in here. Like, I do not need to know how John Marsden learned how to run a ranch. I don't need to know the ranch that he used to work at. I don't need to know about all those guys out in the woods who are just weird, crazy people, and I have to go and fight them. I kept thinking that they were going to come back around, like that was going to be the thing that ended up pushing John Marsden to go, well, I can't lead a simple life. I gotta go out there and just be a killer all over again. No, that didn't really happen. They had to go and save Uncle, and Uncle was totally fine. And I kept thinking to myself, okay, well, maybe Charles is going to die during this mission, and I hope Charles doesn't die. I really like Charles. Charles is a great character, but nope. Charles survived, totally fine. Everything was okay. And then when I went and saved Uncle, I was like, well, all right, they're going to come and retaliate. They're going to try and burn down my ranch. I'm going to have to save the ranch. No, we literally just said, oh, looks like they're just gone now. Looks like they're not going to come back again. They're just going to move on to the next place. And I was like, so there was no point to any of this other than they just thought, you know what, people are probably going to get bored if we have this thing go on for 4 hours and they don't get to shoot somebody during that 4 hours. Make it 1 hour and I won't have a problem with that. Yeah, I honestly feel like if you had started this game out when John Marsden was on the ranch, just say it had been a couple of years, and have like that be the moment where your wife leaves you with the kid, and then you decide, you know what, I gotta leave this place, I gotta go out there, I gotta find something that will prove to my wife that I really am serious about turning my life around, and then you start building your own ranch, leave out all the crazy people in the woods who attack you, just, you know, give us like a montage, give us the moment where he goes and he finds Charles again, give us some interactions between him and Sadie, which, oh my god, was Sadie an amazing character. I'm gonna come back to that in just a second. But yeah, just focus on that part, have that be about an hour, then his wife and son come back, give us some nice bonding moments between them for, you know, a good like 15 minutes, and then have us go out there to take on Micah one last time, and that's it. That's it. Okay, like an hour and a half. Done. And I think that all the really important stuff in there, like the moment in which he goes out and proposes to his wife, which that was fantastic, that the ring that he proposes to his wife was a ring that he got from Arthur, and it was the ring that Arthur was going to give to the girl that he loves. That was amazing. I freaking love that moment. But yeah, everything else in there, I don't feel like it's important in any way, and it just dragged this down so much for me. But it does give a lot more weight to that first game. And speaking of that first game, I'm gonna throw out a theory right now. In the first game, Dutch dies. Second game, Dutch goes crazy. I feel like the third game, if we do ever get a Red Dead 3, which it'd be crazy if we didn't get a Red Dead 3, but I feel like the third game, I think they're going to go even further back. It's going to be a prequel to the prequel, and I think it's going to star Dutch. I think it's going to be the origin of Dutch. You are going to be playing as Dutch in that third game. That is my theory. It's going to be you starting off, you go for a couple of years, then you meet up with Arthur, you kind of take him under your wing, and you end up becoming the mentor to him. And maybe, I don't know, like the very last line of the game is, don't worry, Arthur, I got a plan. I'm going a little bit too deep on this now, but yeah, I seriously think that if we get Red Dead 3, I think that is going to be what completes the trilogy. I think it's going to be the origin of Dutch van der Linde. But okay, I briefly mentioned Sadie in there, and another problem that I did have with the beginning of this game is that it just kept giving us all these missions that I felt weren't that important. I felt like they were there just kind of to introduce us to the people in our gang, which is a good idea, but I feel like the stories that very closely tied into the main storyline itself did that pretty fine on their own. But there are some missions in here. There are a handful of missions that are meant to solely just explore these characters and set up these characters that I think were important. And I'll admit, the mission where I had to take Sadie into town to go shopping, that was another one of those missions that was just like, oh my god, I don't care about this, and we've had so many dumb missions like this. Just get back to the main important storyline. And then Sadie ended up becoming the MVP of this game. I will admit that Dutch and Arthur are better, more developed characters, but Sadie might be my favorite. Sadie is a real close third behind those front two. I loved going on every single little mission with her. I love that mission, which is a totally optional one, but it's the one where she has to go out there and get revenge for the people that killed her husband. Watching the moment where they had to go to that hanging, and she was just so focused on making sure that this guy hung, just seeing like the anger and rage in her eyes, but also just watching that slow progression of her. Man, that's something that this game does well. It does slow progressions of characters going from point A to point B. It does that stuff wonderfully, and Sadie is such a good example of that. She may be my personal favorite character in this entire game. However, speaking of the other characters in here, yeah, I think that there's a ton of great ones. I think that Hosea and Lenny and Charles are all wonderful. However, there are a handful of characters in here who I was honestly shocked at the fact that I didn't really get to know them, and it felt like with as many missions as we went on in this game, as much time as we spent just sitting down and talking to these characters, it's still kind of odd to me that at the end of this game, there were like 2 characters who I still just had like almost no connection with. And one of them was the Irish lady who had a thing for Dutch. And when she popped up at the end of this game and she said, yeah, that's right, I'm the one who told everyone about you, which it turns out that she was lying. She was saying this just to hurt Dutch, just to make Dutch feel bad. But when she popped up and said that, I just looked at her like, I'm sorry, do I know you? Have you been here the entire time? And again, it wasn't until I was going back and getting footage from my gameplay to use in this review that I realized, oh, I actually did have like one real quick interaction with her where she was talking about how much she loved Dutch. But there was another character in here who, again, you get one quick interaction with her where she's like, well, here's my backstory and here's why I'm okay riding with you guys. You guys save me from this thing. And I just looked at him like, okay, sure. Do I remember you? Are you that lady that we saved in the beginning of the game? Oh my god, I don't remember any of this. I feel like the length of this game and how much time it spends focusing on certain characters gives it a little bit of an uneven balance with some of the other characters in here, because there were just a handful of characters who, yeah, I didn't really bond with because the game didn't really give me those opportunities to bond with them because they really wanted me to bond with other characters. And I kind of felt like there came a point where I had sufficiently bonded with these characters. I feel like I didn't need to have any more interactions with the Irish guy or with Uncle. I feel like I knew these guys pretty well, and there were other characters in here who felt kind of important to the plot, and towards the end, I kind of don't think I got enough time with them. Of course, I'll admit, maybe that's because I didn't spend as much time in the camp as they probably wanted me to. This game definitely wanted me to just hunker down, just hang out there in the camp, just play some cards, just chat with the other people in my gang, and I really just kind of wanted to move this story along. And then when I finally got to that point where the world opened up to me and I could just engage in all these crazy, insane side quests, yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to do. I really didn't care about hanging out with these people who I'd spent the entire game with, so I will admit, that's probably just on me. But now that we are talking about the crazy side quest, I'm just gonna real quickly talk about a couple of the ones that I enjoyed the most. I absolutely love the interaction between Arthur and the old man who was the war veteran who was missing his leg. When we first got the horse in this game, I looked at him and we were playing this on stream and I was like, this horse stinks. This horse is tiny and his stats are terrible, and we literally just sold a horse that was better than this one, and I don't want to use this horse. And people in the chat were telling me, it's like, well, you know, if you spend time with your horse, you can bond with it and you can actually form a connection with it. And yeah, I never formed a connection with my horse. I always looked at my horse like, oh god, you're so worthless, you're so pathetic, I don't want anything to do with this horse. But then eventually we got to that point where I met the old man and he had that big golden horse. And about halfway through that character's storyline, I realized what was going to happen to that old man. And I even had a really strong hunch what was going to happen to his horse. And sure enough, I was absolutely correct. When it got to that point in the story where we had to split up to go searching for this boar, I knew that boar was going to kill him. And then, sure enough, when his final dying words were to take care of his horse, I looked at that horse and went, this is an incredibly powerful horse. It looks really cool. It has great stats. And yet, when I started writing it, I almost started like welling up with tears because the interactions between Arthur and this old man were so good, and you actually get little bits of Arthur's backstory interacting with this old man as he's talking about how he doesn't really remember his parents and there's not really much to talk about with his father. And then you've got this older man in there who's taking Arthur fishing. He's taking him out, showing him how to hunt. And I was like, this guy kind of is becoming like a father figure to Arthur. And up until this point, I guess Dutch was the closest he had to a father figure. I guess he was more like an older brother figure to him. But now he kind of finally has a character like that in his life. And he passed away. And he left him his horse. And yeah, I used that horse throughout the rest of the game. And I always kind of felt sad about it. I mean, we would be riding that horse and it would be getting me places way quicker and it would look awesome while it was traveling around. And yet I always just kind of felt sad about it because it reminded me of that old man. And, you know, needless to say, the game ends with your horse dying. Your horse dies and Arthur says thank you to it as it's dying. And if that had been any other horse, if that had been the horse that I started the game with and never cared about throughout the entire course of the game, it still would have been kind of emotional. But in that moment when he said thank you to that horse, listen, I know that's pre-programmed in there. I know they just put that in there so that he says that no matter what horse it is. But that's the amazing thing about video games. Because you can open up side quests, it can alter the way that you perceive certain moments in the game that are set moments, moments that cannot be altered, but the way that you play a game, it can give those specific moments different meanings. And yeah, when I saw Arthur telling the horse thank you, in my mind, he was saying thank you to that old man. He was saying thank you. He was like, listen, I never really had anything, and you gave me something. You gave me a moment to spend with someone who really cared about me. And man, it really just gut punched me harder than almost anything in this game. And as I said, it's subtext to a line that only really exists because of the way that I'm reading into that line because of side quests that I did that were completely optional. That's kind of the amazing thing about video games. In fact, in that review that we did, I mentioned that there was an interaction that I had with a character that was completely optional because it only appears if A, you take the good path in this game, and B, you do several other side quests before that moment in the game. But despite that it is that optional and that hard to get to, it was a moment that just destroyed me emotionally. It was the moment in which the sister from the church comes up to you when you are at the train station, and she just sits down with you and she has a conversation, one last conversation before she heads off to Mexico, which that was the moment that it hit me. Oh, this is the nun from the first game that you find in Mexico. Oh, okay. All right. I never put those together. Which I will admit, while we are on that topic, I think there's a few too many times where this game kind of foreshadows stuff. Like, as I said, I thought it was actually really cool going back how Dutch toasts Arthur's health, and we all know what happens to Arthur. And then there's that other moment in which Arthur's like, it's not like we're going to end up in a cave, and then sure enough, you end up in a cave. But there's a lot of moments where they reference stuff in the first game. Like, there's several times in here in which they talk about John Marsden and about how, yeah, don't worry, I'm not going to die here. Spoilers for Red Dead 1. Or there's one moment in which they're talking about Mexico, and John Marsden just says, man, I never want to go back to Mexico. And I went, all right, dude, yeah, okay, we all know what happens in that first game. Yes, thank you very much, John. Yes, wonderful. But yeah, when you are having that interaction at the train station with the nun, it was stunning to me that this is an interaction that is completely optional. It only happens if you do like 9 other things in this game up till this point. And it's not like it gives you anything. It's not like you get any like huge massive reward. Like if you think about like an RPG or especially a JRPG, if you did like 9 other things for a side quest and played the game specifically this one way in order to unlock this special conversation, you would get some special legendary weapon at the end. All that you get in this is just a conversation, but the conversation that Arthur needed, because it's at this point in which Arthur is dying from tuberculosis, and it's finally in this moment where Arthur kind of breaks down a little bit, and he reveals, yeah, it's actually finally hitting me. I'm not gonna make it. I know that I am going to die. And he actually says that he's scared. And Arthur Morgan, up until this moment, has been the biggest badass in this entire game. Just no matter what he's going up against, he has just got this square-jawed, like, grin on him that just shows off like he ain't afraid of nothing. And then this moment, like, when you get that, like, little sniff from him and his eyes are turned a little bit red, and just goes, well, I'm afraid. Man, it just broke me down in that moment. And it's incredible that there are huge, amazing emotional moments like that almost hidden in this game. Just moments that you really have to work for and you could end up just never seeing. There are a few other side quests that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the weird German scientist who turned out to basically be Dr. Frankenstein, and you help him build a robot. And yeah, you better believe I went and hunted that robot down and found him in the mountains, which I don't know if that was coincidence that they did that or if they actually were flat out referencing Frankenstein in that moment. It seems like it has to be a reference in there, because for anybody who knows the actual story of Frankenstein, he is found up in the Antarctic. He is found just wandering around in the snowy mountains, and that's where you find him in this game. So it feels like that one had to be a really clever reference, in which case, kudos to you, Rockstar. I had a lot of fun with the storyline for the guy who was building the electric chair. That one was just weird and goofy, although it does kind of tick me off that you get nothing for that quest. In fact, that quest even requires you to spend a lot of money on it, so you actually kind of lose resources by doing that quest. So it was a little bit of a pain, and at the end of it, all you get are just the blueprints for his electric chair. And I just kept thinking to myself, can I, like, not sell this to someone? Can I not do anything? And I looked all over the internet, and sure enough, you can't. Although, speaking of another one that seemed at first like you couldn't do anything with it, but then it actually turned out to be something, was the artist who you met in that one town. I'm blanking on it. I'm sorry, everyone. But yeah, the weird French eccentric artist, I dug the heck out of that quest. I love that this guy is just so weird, and you can tell he's annoying the hell out of Arthur the entire time he's talking to him. But then there's that one moment in which he causes all the fancy people at the museum to get into a fist fight, and Arthur is laughing his ass off. And it hit me in that moment, this is probably the closest to a normal friendship Arthur is ever going to have with someone. Because yeah, he's friends with all the other people in the camp, he really cares about them, but he doesn't really have a drinking buddy who he can just laugh with, just someone who makes him laugh. And it was really kind of a delight to see this very weird, completely polar opposite character to Arthur Morgan just able to have that connection with him. Speaking of personal connections that Arthur ended up developing with other characters in the side quest, I love the side quest with the widow, the character whose husband had died, and now she has almost resigned herself to death because she doesn't know how to hunt, she doesn't know how to do anything to really just survive on her own. She didn't grow up here out in the West, she moved out here to be with her husband, and now he's dead, and she's basically just going to starve to death. And Arthur kind of has to teach her how to hunt and how to survive out here, and I love seeing the bond that the two of them form, and it really did kind of look like Arthur and her might actually, I don't know, form a relationship with each other. But by the time it gets to that point, Arthur has realized that he's going to die, and there's that final moment where they say goodbye to each other, and you can just tell Arthur wants to stay there. He wants to just say goodbye to everything else in his life. He just wants to say goodbye to Dutch and to the gang and just turn away from this, but he knows he's going to die anyways, and that's the last thing that this lady needs. And it really is kind of double heartbreaking when you consider Arthur actually even has another person who was a love interest of his, someone who he was going to marry. He cared about her so much, but then for one reason or another, the two of them couldn't be together, And they have all these other moments in the game where it looks like, oh, they might actually finally get back together and Arthur might actually ride out there off into the sunset. But you know that isn't going to happen, and you keep cheering for that to happen, but then Arthur gets sick. And at first, I kind of had a problem with him getting sick, and I'll go into more details about him being sick and his illness and how I think that affects the game later on. But yeah, I did kind of have a problem with that at first, but it makes some of the storylines in here so much more powerful, because while you, the audience, might be sitting there at home screaming at your screen, just say goodbye to Dutch, just give all this up and just go off with the woman you love, you know he's going to die very soon. So he can't do that no matter what. He is now stuck to be in this gang, and he has to just do whatever he can with this gang in the time that he has left. But as I mentioned in that review, my favorite things in this game weren't even the main side quests. It was the weird Easter egg side quests that were just incredibly bizarre. And it has been months since this game has come out, and people are still finding new ones. That is how many crazy things are in here. In fact, I found a couple of them by looking up online after I had finished the game, and it really ticked me off that I didn't find them while I was in the game. Like, there's a haunted forest in here. Hell, there's a haunted forest and a haunted swamp. There's so many like spooky ghosts in this game, so many weird, monstrous abominations just running around. I am really hoping that they end up doing some kind of a Halloween Undead Nightmare DLC for this thing, because they've already set so much spooky stuff in here that's supposed to be hidden. I can't imagine what weird, creepy stuff they put in here that you're supposed to find. My favorite one had to be the storyline involving the aliens. I remember when I walked into that cabin for the first time, and all of a sudden the music just changes on a dime. There are all these skeletons just laying about, and there's just a note about, hey, if you come by here at this specific time, you might see something. And then sure enough, the space alien ship just starts coming down, and then there's another place where you can find another alien ship. And apparently, just recently, right before I started recording this, someone found a third spaceship, and here's the weird thing. No one else has been able to reproduce what this person found in their game. No one else has been able to stumble upon this, at least at the time of this recording. But that's how crazy this is. It's not some weird hoax that someone put together. They even got a special item in there that you can see Arthur wearing as he walks around. It's something that you're supposed to be able to find in this game, but it's hidden so well that nobody's been able to reproduce this so far. It is insane to me that they went to this length for something that is supposed to be hidden, something that most people would never even find in this game. In a weird way, it really takes me back to when I was a kid playing games and we didn't have the internet, and sure, every now and again a magazine would come out that would give you some kind of a clue about what you could find in a game. But most of the time, if you wanted to find the really weird special stuff in a video game, you had to just get it word of mouth. You had to just go up to other people who had been playing the game and just compare notes until you could figure stuff out. That's kind of what Red Dead 2 was able to turn the internet into. It turned it into a playground all over again, where everybody was just going, well, here's the little bit that I was able to figure out. Maybe it means something if you combine it with this thing, and everybody's just sharing their own little hidden secrets that they were all able to find. It's incredible. It honestly has filled me with so much joy just hunting down every little secret that I can find. Even not when I'm playing the game, even when I'm just going through YouTube and just finding what other people were able to uncover. No other game has really ever been able to give me that feeling since I was a kid. But alright, we've been going for a little while now, and it's about time that we finally start wrapping this up by talking about the protagonist himself, Arthur Morgan. And it's actually kind of hard to talk about Arthur Morgan because there is so much to his character and his story that I know as soon as I am done recording this, there's gonna be like 9 more things that I think of that I wanted to say. But since this is a spoiler talk, let's go ahead and get into the most spoilery part of his entire story. I remember when I was just walking down the streets of Saint Denis, and all of a sudden, he just started to get a little bit wobbly, And I thought, okay, well, I haven't really been eating anything unless I needed to heal myself, and I know that that's caused him to be kind of skinny, which it's weird that they gave you like a skinny, healthy, overweight meter, but it didn't like ever change his appearance, but people would comment on your appearance. That was a little bit odd. But yeah, I kept thinking to myself, what was that? Did I get like some really weird side quest activated where I touched like a poison frog or something and now I have to go and get an antidote or something like that? And I know someone might think, well, that sounds like a crazy side quest. There have been some crazy side quests in this game. I would not put past Rockstar to put some kind of a quest in here that's activated by just simply walking past one random thing in the environment. But no, he drops over, he can't even move, someone helps you get to the doctor's office, and then they tell you you've got tuberculosis. Now, I will admit, when I got this cutscene, I did not really know what tuberculosis was. I have been lucky enough that I've never run across it in my life. I've never had it, no one I've known has ever had. It's never really been a thing that's ever come up in my day-to-day life. So when he told Arthur Morgan that he had tuberculosis, I thought to myself, oh, right, there's like a whole sickness thing in this game where Arthur can get sick, and if he gets sick, then his stamina bar doesn't raise as fast, eating doesn't heal him as much, all these other negative side effects come in. Oh, okay, I see, that's what this is. It's kind of weird that they would create this whole cutscene for a simple small thing that will be cured in a matter of days, and I'll be totally fine as soon as it's all wrapped up. Yeah, that doesn't happen. I actually researched it after I got this cutscene and found that tuberculosis not only was quite deadly back then with almost a 0% survival rate, it's still to this day quite deadly. It's still something that if you get, you're in a lot of trouble and a lot of pain. So as this scene went on, it hit me. Wait a minute, hold up. Are you actually telling me that Arthur now could die from this totally random disease that just came up out of nowhere? And I'll admit, I was actually kind of ticked off at the game when that happened, because I thought this game had been doing an amazing job telling this story of Arthur being tangled up in this gang that was spiraling further and further out of control, and it was pretty obvious to me that this was all going to lead to his death. I mean, there is a reason why Arthur Morgan is not in the first game. So I kept watching this story and thinking to myself, oh man, I know that this is going to lead to a big, dramatic, sad climax that tells the end of Arthur Morgan's story, and we're just going to watch how we slowly get to that point, and then all of a sudden they come in here with a disease that's just going to be the thing that kills him. Like this big story that they had been building up, all of a sudden there's just an X factor thrown in there that just comes out of nowhere, and it's something that just completely takes the story in a different direction. And I was not happy about that at all until I saw the execution of it. And as the story went along and you begin to realize, oh, that's where he got it from. As it slowly dawns on you when he got the infection, you realize this was not a random thing. This was something that they planted in here early. This is something that came up like 4 hours into this 40 to 80 hour long video game. For anybody who doesn't know, and believe me, there are some people out there who don't know. I have actually run into some people who have completed this game. They've finished Arthur's story, and they still don't know when he got tuberculosis. They think it's a thing that happened before this game even started. No, remember early on when you go on those missions for Herr Strauss? When he has loaned money out to some people, and now he's sending you out there to beat them up and get the money back? One of the first people you go to is this kindly guy with a family, and he's sick and dying, but he still owes the money, and even though he's been trying to do good, and a lot of people look up to him and respect him for all the good he's done in the community, you have to go and beat him up. It is a painful mission, because if you're like me and you wanted to play this game as the good version of Arthur Morgan, then yeah, you're basically forced to just sit there and watch as Arthur has to do horrible deeds as he has to beat up this old sick man, and when you're beating him up, he spits blood into your mouth. That is the moment that Arthur Morgan got sick. That is the moment in which he got tuberculosis. It's what this guy was sick with, and because you had to go in there and beat this man half to death to get your money back from him, you ended up getting it too. And honestly, after I realized that, not only did I have to stop and take away my complaint that they didn't set this up, because it made me realize, oh, they actually did set this up, but it actually made me look at his disease completely differently. Because as I said, Arthur Morgan, in my gameplay, was trying to be good. But he had a dark past, and he kept being forced to do dark things. And then I looked at this disease that he now had, kind of as almost like a scarlet letter of sorts. It was this thing that was now branded on him as a representation of his sins. It was what goes around comes around. I no longer looked at this as just something random that just happened to come in at the third act twist that just completely changed the entire game around. No, I now looked at this as, oh wow, you really just can't outrun your sins. You can't just avoid all the horrible stuff you've done in your life forever, even if you're really trying to turn your life around. But even beyond that, even just being this symbol of the dark things that he's done in his past, it now provides him with great motivation for his future. Because he is watching as his gang is spiraling out of control. And he is watching as John is slowly trying to become a family man, which it was wild for me to see John at the beginning of this game, in which he just does not care about his family. And to see like how different he is then from how he is in Red Dead 1, and watching John slowly get to that point by the end of this game, yeah, seeing Arthur Morgan caring about his gang and caring about John and wanting them to go off and actually escape and actually survive, which makes the first Red Dead even sadder now, but seeing all that motivation for Arthur, and now him realizing he has a timer on him. He has an expiration date. He is not going to be around forever, and he knows that if he dies, and John and his family are left in Dutch's gang with where Dutch and Micah are taking this gang, he wouldn't be able to handle that. He would not be able to handle knowing that he left John and his family there. It now provides Arthur Morgan with this huge push. It now gives him so much motivation and an extra goal. It makes him realize, yeah, I have to face the facts of what is happening here. Like I talked about how great that moment was where Arthur finally had to tell Dutch that I don't even know what you're talking about and I don't think you know either. If Arthur had never gotten sick, I don't know if he ever would have gotten to that point. Arthur owed Dutch so much and he had so much loyalty to him that honestly, if Arthur didn't get sick, he might have never have turned on Dutch. He might never have fought back against him to try and save John, because he might have thought, well, I know that he's going crazy, but I owe him, and you know what, eventually he'll turn around. Eventually he'll see the error of his ways. But when Arthur doesn't have time to see if he's going to see the error of his ways, it actually forces him to act. And again, I'm just talking about what happens if you go down the honorable path with Arthur. I don't really know what happens if you go down the dishonorable path with Arthur, but the story of Arthur Morgan's redemption is so good, I don't know why you wouldn't want to go down the good path with Arthur. I mean, speaking of those Strauss missions, those were painful for me to do in the beginning of this game, but at the end, the last time that you have to go on these money collecting missions, and Arthur now has finally fully redeemed himself. He's really trying to do the right thing, and he goes up to these families and he now just calls off the debts, or he even calls off the debts and gives them money. Yeah, I actually just really started getting choked up at those moments because it was great seeing Arthur actually redeem himself. And then when he went back to the camp and he actually just kicked Strauss out of there, man, I wanted to applaud so bad at that moment, because yes, while Dutch and Micah might be the big villains of the game, Strauss he, in a weird way, is the worst character in this whole game, because he doesn't go out there and risk his own neck. He sends you off to do it, and he is just crippling and destroying people's lives by forcing them to go into debt, knowing that he can just send one of his muscly goons like you off anytime he wants to just go and rough them up. In fact, early on in this game, there is even a line from Dutch after Strauss says he's going to go into town, see if he can stir up some business, in which Dutch even says, yeah, I kind of always preferred what we do to what he does. It just always kind of seemed a little bit more honorable. Like, even the guy who's going to lead you down this dark path and do so many evil things later on in this game, he even stops and says, yeah, but what he does is so much worse than what we do. So when it gets to that moment where Arthur kicks Strauss out of the camp, yeah, you might want to get your full revenge on Strauss. You might want to be a real rugged cowboy and go in there and shoot him or beat him up, but no, this is such a better revenge because A, it shows that Arthur is trying not to be as violent because we're going down the good path with him, but also, you can tell Strauss has never done a day of labor in his life. He has always just cheated and conned people out of money, and he's basically been able to do that because he's been hiding behind Dutch. You are now sending Strauss out into the real world where he's going to have to make an actual honest living, and you can just tell from the look on Strauss's face that is as good as a death sentence to him. So I love the way that that whole storyline is wrapped up. But speaking of how storylines are wrapped up, let's talk about the big finale to this. I will admit, the final mission that you go on, in which you are robbing the train, it doesn't have quite the impact that it's supposed to, because maybe if you have zero experience with the first game, it'll have a little bit more impact on you. But to me, when it looks like John dies and Dutch is like, I'm sorry, I couldn't. There's nothing that I could do for him. I just kept looking at it as like, dude, he's the protagonist to the sequel to this story. We know he's alive. We know he's going to be all right. And there is that moment earlier on in which you have to rescue John from the prison, and Dutch wasn't going to go and rescue him. And in Red Dead 1, there's that line in which John says, you left me to die, and I had been assuming that's what that was in reference to, but when it gets to this point in which Dutch is like, okay, I'm gonna go and save John, and he comes back and is like, oh, I couldn't save John, there's nothing I could do. It's like, oh, okay, well now I know what that line means, but I know for a fact that John is not dead. Unless you want to come in here and do just the biggest twist in video game history, in which you set this up like it was going to be a prequel, and then with like 10 minutes left in the game, you reveal to us, no, it actually wasn't a prequel. This is actually its own completely separate story set in its own universe where John Marsden does actually end up dying. We all know he's not going to die. So yeah, that didn't really quite have the impact on me, and I kept kind of just sitting there going, and he's going to come back now. He's going to come back now. Now. However, even knowing that John was coming back, at the end of this thing, in which you've got Arthur and John running off there to stop Micah and Dutch, and they're going up for their big final shootout with them, yeah, that is an amazing scene. There's so many amazing scenes of you guys like charging into battle. The one in which you have to go to the big oil refinery plant and there's just that big explosion off in the distance that you're running right into. That's one of the most gorgeous shots in this entire game. But of course, this all leads up to Arthur Morgan's death. And I know that there's like 4 different ways that he can die in this game. The way that I got is he's gotten the crap kicked out of him, and Micah and Dutch just run off, and John is just left up there on the mountain, and he's just staring off into the distance as the sun slowly comes back up. And I couldn't find this when I was going back through my earlier clips, but I have heard people say that there's also foreshadowing for this, in which he talks about how he wants to die is on the top of a mountain just looking at the sun coming up, which if that is in this game, then wow, I'm amazed that I missed that. But I think that that is honestly a beautiful shot. And as I said, there is that one dangling plot thread of you have to go and take care of Micah. And I knew that there was an epilogue coming, just like there is in the first game. And I knew that they were going to have it be John going out there to kill Micah. And while I do have a problem with the fact that there's also about 6 more hours of stuff that isn't Jon going out there to kill Micah, I do think it is actually a good conclusion to this story, and it does set up the next installment of the franchise pretty darn well to have that be how this story ends. But it is still just such a sad ending for Arthur, but it's not a complete downer ending, because the entire name of this game is Red Dead Redemption. And redemption doesn't always mean, oh, you go off into the sunset and everything's okay. Sometimes redemption just means saving your soul. And seeing Arthur finally fighting back against these guys and him doing everything that he can to save Jon and his family, yeah, in my mind, he did earn his redemption. Him up there looking off into the distance as the sun rises, it is the moment in which you can kind of tell like the weight is finally gone from his shoulders. This thing that he's been carrying for so long, it's finally gone. And it is kind of a peaceful death for him. I know it's weird saying that having been beaten half to death and then dying as tuberculosis takes you on the top of a cold mountain all by yourself is a peaceful death, but compared to Jon's story and how it got him to this point and everything that he went through, I do think that this honestly is probably the best ending that he possibly could have gotten. You want him to go off into the sunset. You do want him to go off there with his lady friend from back home, or with that widow that he met up in the mountains. You want him to actually settle down and lead a good life, but yeah, you know that was never going to happen, and you have to accept that redemption takes on different meanings. And in this game, this was the best redemption that he was going to get. He was able to save Jon and their family. At least for about 10 more years than the events of Red Dead 1 happened, and I do know that there are some people who have looked at Red Dead 1, and spoiler alert for Red Dead 1, yeah, Jon dying in that game, some people have looked at that as saying that there is no redemption for these characters. Red Dead Redemption refers to the fact that their chances of ever redeeming themselves are dead. There is nothing that they can possibly do. And I don't interpret it that way. I cannot agree with the people who say that, because again, that's people looking at redemption as being, you go off into the sunset and you get that happy ending that you always wanted. No, redemption means many different things, and the fact that even at the end of Red Dead 1, Jon Marsden's son is still alive. He's out there and he actually is able to finally avenge his dad at the end of that. That's all possible because of everything that the people who came before him were able to do. They were able to save this little kid who was a member of their gang, which I keep talking about what the very first game could end up being. And again, I mentioned how I think that it's going to be the story of Dutch and how he met Arthur and how he met Jon. How weird would it be if like the very last thing that happens in that game is the birth of Jon Marsden's son? That would be an amazing way to cap off this trilogy. But again, that's me getting into tons of theories and stuff and just speculations for things that won't even happen for like 8 more years. But I do think that these characters found redemption. They just didn't necessarily find it in a happy life. They found it in other people being able to carry on, other people being able to survive. With Arthur, he was able to get Jon and his family out of this gang, and for a while, they were able to lead a happy life. Their lives were able to go on. Sadie was able to go on. She was able to make a career for herself. Charles was able to go on. Some of these characters were able to survive, and it was all thanks to Arthur. These characters living on is the redemption that Arthur Morgan was going for. And even though Jon eventually met his end, the fact that his family was able to keep going is his own redemption. So again, that's just my interpretation of this style, my interpretation of what I think kind of the big message of the whole game is. And as I said, I know there's gonna be like 10 other things I want to talk about as soon as I am done with this. I didn't even get to talk about what happens when you rob the bank and what happens to poor Lenny and poor Hosea. There's so much more to go into details there. But yeah, I think those are the big issues that I want to hit on. And I hope that you guys enjoyed our spoiler talk. If you missed our very first review, then it's very weird that you started with the spoiler talk, but a card for it should be popping up right now. Let me know all of your thoughts on Red Dead Redemption 2 in the comments down below. What do you think will be happening in Red Dead Redemption 3? Let me know that in the comments down below as well, and then come back in 8 years to find out whether or not we were all correct about. But if you want to see more videos like this, then make sure that you follow me on Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr at Professor Thorgi. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time. Bye.